Have you ever looked at your life and thought, I should be happy? I've worked hard for this. Or why does success feel so exhausting? If you're asking yourself any of these questions, it probably comes because you have a career and hopefully it's one that you love or enjoy or know that that's what you're supposed to be doing. You probably have credentials that helped you get there, right? That gave you the knowledge to do the job that you're doing. And you have responsibilities and you focus on those responsibilities. And maybe you even have the income you once dreamed about. Yet you're tired all the time. Work follows you home because your brain never shuts off, right? So do you have those nights where you're exhausted and you want to go to sleep, but you can't turn your mind off? It just keeps thinking about work, one thought after another, right? What we might call racing thoughts. It just doesn't stop. Or maybe you feel like there's success on paper, so your resume looks like you have accomplished a lot, but in real life, you feel extremely depleted, right? Feeling like I don't know how much more I can do. I'm not accomplishing what I want. And if you're experiencing any of those things, there is a reason for that. And I call this the sustainable performance gap. The sustainable performance gap is the space between that external success and your internal sustainability, right? So it's having the capacity to be successful versus exhausted. And the wider that gap becomes, the closer you're probably moving towards burnout. And so, as we talk about today's topic, I want you to pay attention to how many of these signs sound familiar to you. Because if you recognize any of yourself in this video, I have created a professional burnout assessment and I invite you to take it, and it will be linked below because it is designed to help you identify your current burnout risk. So, are you starting to show signs of stress and maybe heading towards burnout? Or are you in what I might call the severe risk of burnout and you're already there, you're already extremely depleted and it's starting to affect you physically? And when you can identify these areas and know which areas of performance are impacting you, then you can know what the right recovery steps are that you need to focus on so that you can start to reclaim your health and your energy and your desires. And so it will be linked below. But I want to share a little bit of my story because it's impactful to why I'm doing this work. You see, I was a manager and a program director. I was succeeding by all external measures. I was leading multiple programs, managing multiple teams, and assisting other managers, while I was also serving clients as a licensed therapist. And I truly was in a career I cared about because I love helping people. But what people didn't notice was going on for me was I was eating fast food instead of cooking when I had a freezer full of meat. I was lucky if I slept for 4 hours a night. There was constant pressure to show up at any time when the phone rang, and I didn't feel like I had the margin to make adjustments. But what was really impactful and the point of why I'm doing what I'm doing, and I don't want to see you get there, is my physician, when I went in for a wellness check, looked at me and said, Deidre, your job is killing you. And if you don't make a change, I can't help you. And that was huge. That was the moment I really connected stress to my physical health and how important it is for us to manage stress and not get to the exhausted, burned out state that I was in because it was destroying my health. And you see, the problem was not that I wasn't successful. The problem was that my success was not sustainable. The way I functioned, I could not sustain. And this happened in a matter of 6 months to a year. I went from sleeping 10 hours at night because my body was really repairing to not sleeping and my physical health just went in the tank, right? And so This is where I really began to study what creates sustainable performance, because the more we try and focus on those temporary achievements, that's not sustainable, right? That kind of feeds our need for this instant gratification. And instant gratification is not sustainable because it also impacts your body and your brain the same way stress does, the same way burnout does. And honestly, the same way it's stress, it's anxiety, it could be trauma for some people. Our bodies respond the same. And so when we talk about the sustainable performance gap, what we want to look at is when performance remains high, your capacity to sustain that steadily declines, right? We can't sustain certain ways of functioning long term. There are certain characteristics that show up when we're talking about the sustainable performance gap, and these often show up resulting where you are trying to remain strong but you can't, right? You're focused so much on the results. Is your energy steadily decreasing? Meaning you used to be able to sustain and feel energized for eight-hour workday and go home and enjoy a bike ride with your family. And instead you go home and you just want to sit on the couch. You don't want to cook, you don't want to do anything because your energy is depleted. Maybe you're finding recovery becomes harder. So if you're one who used to really recover on a vacation from work, you take that time off and you come back and you feel rejuvenated and energized and you're back to your usual self where you can sustain that energy all day and still do things in the evening. But now that becomes harder because that vacation is not enough to help you fully recover. You're probably in a state of burnout. You might notice that your relationships also suffer, right? When you're stressed, what happens? You might get irritable and snappy with people, and then therefore conflict arises, or you're avoiding hanging out with people and spending time with them and you isolate. Your relationships are suffering. And one of the key indicators that maybe you're in the severe state of burnout is when you're starting to question your purpose because your purpose is buried, meaning your purpose didn't go away. If you believe you're in the field that you were called to, that you're supposed to be doing, and you truly enjoy it when you are energized, your purpose isn't gone. It is just buried underneath the amount of stress, exhaustion, burnout, and depletion that you are feeling. And this can be dangerous. You see, most people think they're fine because they're performing. So that goes to if those external performance measures are being met, but internally you're starting to decline, that's a dangerous place to be because you're probably also losing that connection with your body. You have to stay connected to your body to be able to sustain what it is you want to sustain, right? And so oftentimes the warning signs of burnout are hidden behind that productivity, that external performance. And you see those who are focused on those external performance and have this high productivity output are often seen as high achievers, but high achievers and high performers I see as some of the most vulnerable population to experiencing burnout. And the reason for this is high performers have a strong work ethic, right? If they have signed up to do a job, they're going to do the job and they're going to go above and beyond because they also take ownership for the things that they have agreed to, the responsibilities they have taken on. High performers often feel responsible for the outcome. So if you're a leader and you're a high performer, you probably feel responsible not just for the outcome of the work you're doing, but you're responsible for the outcome of your entire team, which means you're going to step up and fill the gaps. But is that pushing you too far? Are you having difficulty when you disappoint others, right? High performers don't like to disappoint people. High performers want other people to be happy with what they're doing. And this is often tied to, we tie our identity to achievement, meaning I'm a good person and I'm worthwhile if I am achieving and performing, right? We don't separate what we achieve from who we are as a person. And our identity should not be attached to that achievement but for high performers, it often is. And so high achievers and high performers, and most people who are in a burnout cycle, they can get stuck in this trap where success and those external performance measures reinforce the behaviors that are causing you to feel burnt out, right? Meaning, are you one who's working longer hours? That's what got me. I kept saying yes and showing up. Now, granted, I had to because I was part of the crisis team, but are you working longer than required, right? Yes, as leaders, we always put in a little more time, but we have to check ourselves too. Are you taking on more than you can manage? Meaning, do you really have the capacity to keep saying yes? In my experience, high performers are also yes people, right? They're people pleasers, so they're going to take on more even if they don't have the capacity. Are you maybe trying to solve everybody's problems? Right? Sometimes as leaders and high performers, we try and help solve the problem versus offering guidance so people can solve their own problems. And last, are you ignoring your physical needs, right? When I said that I ate a lot of fast food, I wasn't giving my body what it truly needed to sustain. I was just feeding it to hopefully sustain, but really it was adding to the burnout cycle. And so those are things I want you to pay attention to, right? And that's why I created the burnout to balance model, where we identify and understand what burnout truly is. And we work on that awareness of what you're experiencing so that when we can rebuild your recovery or we build your recovery plan, right? It's what's doable with your current life. Because I don't believe that having this huge plan where you have to restructure your entire day and your entire life is possible. And it's not going to happen. I have watched this repeatedly. That big plan just overwhelms you more. And so we build a recovery plan that is possible, and you start to feel improvements a lot quicker, right? And once we have that recovery, we can start to align our practices so that we're more sustainable and then balanced. Some people talk about having work-life integration, and I think that's great. And I see the same thing, but I just call it balance because we're always balancing in life, right? We have to constantly be adjusting what gets more of our attention. And a lot of times, what I have seen is that most people don't fully realize they're in burnout. They'll just say, I'm not burnt out, I'm exhausted. I also get a lot of people who say, Deidre, I'm burnt out. I don't know if I can keep going. And part of the struggle there is most people don't realize that they've been burnt out, but they've been in that state for too long. Because the longer you're in it, the more you just think this is normal. I just have to keep pushing through. And that's not sustainable, right? And there are costs of trying to sustain something that's not possible. So physically, you're going to hit a point of fatigue, right? Where no matter what you do, you just can't recover enough energy. You're probably going to have sleep deprivation, and sleep is so imperative to our health, right? Our body recovers and rests, our brain detoxes and repairs. But if you're having major sleep disruption, that's a hidden cost of you're not sustaining. Too much stress also causes hormonal imbalances, right? Cortisol is a hormone. It's our stress hormone, and it constantly increases and floods our body because that's what helps us get through what our body perceives as not a safe situation, which happens when you're in burnout. And that's going to throw off all your other hormones that help your body function as it was designed. And if you're constantly in this state of stress, right? Unsustainable success is because it's a chronic stress state. One situation after another with not enough time to recover and repair in between. Those are the physical costs of an unsustainable, successful process. The emotional costs would be things like irritability. So maybe you're snapping at people. I've done that. I've actually cussed at a supervisor. Don't recommend it, not proud of it, but it's just what happens, right? Because I was just reactive. Maybe you're cynical. I see cynicism show up in workplaces a lot when people are in a state of chronic stress or they're getting burnt out because they cannot sustain what's going on. It's nonstop anxiety, right? Always waiting for the next shoe to drop. And that's the language I hear all the time. I'm just waiting for the next thing to come. Okay. And maybe you're starting to feel disconnected, right? This can be disconnected from people, but you're starting to disconnect from the work you do, and you're starting to disconnect from that purpose. The relational costs might include you're not present with your family. So you might physically be with your family, but mentally you're not present. Your mind is off thinking about work and you're not focused and aware of what's going on around you, even if you're physically there. You might even have less patience than normal, right? And that connects back to the irritability we were just talking about. If you don't have patience, you're going to be reactive. And so as a way to cope, you might start isolating. So if you're somebody who's very social, out with friends and family all the time, and all of a sudden you're declining invites or you're just not showing up, you're not in a place of sustainability, right? You're experiencing that burnout. Professionally, you might start to describe things like, I just can't think clearly, right? That brain fog has set in, meaning your thinking is not clear. So fast foods, for example, increases that brain fog. So it's how do we impact that, right? Not enough rest, the brain's carrying everything from yesterday into the next day. Are you struggling to make decisions? And this can be as simple as, what are we fixing for dinner? The one question that never goes away in life. But you all of a sudden, you can't make a decision. You can't even think through those options. You're in burnout probably, and you're not in a sustainable process. Maybe you're somebody who's usually creative and that all of a sudden has declined. Creativity can go out the window when you're struggling. And in turn, as a leader, are you becoming less effective? You might not notice it if the output is still high, but you might notice if you're losing that effectiveness. You see, so let's shift a little bit now that we've talked about like what are those signs and things to pay attention to, and we'll circle back to them again in a minute. But I want to offer a little bit on how do we create that sustainable performance, because you're probably thinking, yeah, Deidre, I see myself in this, but now what? Well, that's why I created the Spark framework method. And I created this because I want to help people have a simple way to start to recover, right? So when we start to see the problem clearly and we recognize where we're at in that sustainable performance gap, that's the first step. If we don't know what the problem is or where the problem stems from, it's going to be hard to build that recovery plan. But once we know and see that problem, we can start to pinpoint those root causes. And those root causes are going to be stressors in life, maybe habits that you're doing that sustain that unhealthy pattern, or they're the habits that always helped you feel restful and energized and you stopped doing, right? So we have to look at both sides. What are the systems you have in place for yourself? And this is for your own health. So we're talking physical, spiritual, mental, emotional, relationally, there are systems we put in place. And once we have pinpointed those root causes, that's where we can start to activate changes and talk about small, sustainable habits. I am a huge advocate for small shifts, not large overhauls, because we don't get the relief as quickly with large overhauls and we just give up because we don't notice the difference. Once we've started to make these small shifts, we want to start to build these and reinforce healthy systems, right? The R in Spark, reinforce healthy systems. So we have to look at what are those things, those habits that help us recover. What are those daily rhythms we need to be in, or yearly, monthly rhythms? And one of the harder things for high achievers are Boundaries. Are there boundaries we need to set in place for ourselves and for those around us? And the last aspect of Spark is keeping the momentum, right? So once we've done all of these things, we've shifted habits, we've made small changes that we can sustain, and now we're reinforcing. How do we keep that going for the long term so that you can have that long-term sustainability? These are also important to recovering from burnout, overcoming burnout, and preventing it. I don't want to see people get to the place I was physically. And so I think it's important to be able to recognize, where are you at in this journey? How are you feeling? How is your energy and your capacity to get things done, right? Because sustainable performance isn't always about doing less. And you might hear me in other videos talk about less is more, and that is true, but it's not necessarily about doing less. It's just about creating a way of working and living that doesn't require sacrificing yourself. Because if you sacrifice yourself, you won't be around and be functional, right? It's going to be hard to function. So the first step, if you're saying, Deidre, this resonates, but now what? The first step to closing that sustainable performance gap is understanding where you're at. And so if you recognized yourself in anything we've talked about in this video, I invite you to take the professional burnout assessment. It's linked below so that you can have that awareness and start to diagnose and understand, because it's just a diagnostic tool, right? It's not a diagnosis. It's that awareness and that starting point. Where am I at? And then from there, we can start to talk about how and what do I do to start to recover and prevent going down this path any further, right? Because when we understand where stress is impacting our performance, we can build practical steps. I'm going to, this is the first video in this month's series. And in the next video, we're going to talk about why high achievers get trapped in the burnout cycle and how they unknowingly make it worse. So if you've ever felt like you're working harder, but getting further away from the life you want, you don't want to miss that. So make sure you subscribe. Because remember, success should not require self-sacrifice. And if the only way to maintain your performance is to exhaust yourself, that's not sustainable. It's borrowing time. But the good news is that burnout isn't a sign you failed. It's a signal that something needs to change. So start by taking the burnout assessment and let's identify where you're at in the sustainable performance gap and what you can do, because I want you to have success without self-sacrifice.